So this is the vessel operators panel, and like I said, my old friend of probably, 15, 16 years, Rick Aschieris is the port director at the Port of Stockton. Rick's been the chief executive officer of the Port of Stockton since 2000. Since his arrival in Stockton, Rick has directed the dramatic expansion of the port and initiated more than $150 million in infrastructure improvement efforts to revitalize and expand port operations. During his tenure, the Port of Stockton has also set tonnage and ship call records with waterborne tonnages to become a leading bulk and breakbulk port in California. He earned a graduate degree from the University of Southern California, undergraduate degree from San Francisco State University, and was the port director in Anacortes and worked at the Port of Long Beach for a few years. So please join me in welcoming Rick Aschieris.
Good morning. Our panel today, we will be talking about vessel operators, container, oil, dry bulk, and autos. And anyway, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. I'm just the traffic cop here, kind of directing traffic. And our first speaker will be Mr. Bill Nickson, who is the Regional General Manager for California, Hawaii, U.S. Atlantic for Transmarine Navigation Corporation. And Bill Nickson is no relation to Richard Nixon, but he is of Norwegian ancestry and born in Nevada, raised in the Puget Sound, and is the grandson of one of the original ILWU members. Mr. Nickson attended University of Puget Sound, where he worked as a casual longshoreman, and in 1971 began his career as a tramp ship agent in Seattle. Then Mr. Nickson went from, in 1981, became district manager of Transmarine Navigation Corporation in San Francisco, and in 96 managed Honolulu. Nice assignment. In 2000, he became regional manager of TNC for the U.S. Gulf region, and TNC recently became the significant USA ESOP employee-owned ship agency, serving 2- and 3-year appointments by the state of California to the Harbor Navigation Committee for the San Francisco Bay region. Mr. Bill Nickson, who is affectionately known as the Butler and the Marine Travel Agent, is with us this morning, and he will be talking about exactly what is a shipping agent. Please welcome Mr. Bill Nickson.
I apologize to you for that. I didn't know he was going to read that. Let's see here. I feel like Mr. Rogers here. Everybody see that? I apologize. I'm not going to do my PowerPoint. I listened to the speakers yesterday, and I kind of changed my lineup here a little bit. One of the things that I noticed yesterday was this magazine that was on the table for everybody yesterday, and while I was intently listening to all the presentations, I was flipping through here, and I realized that this magazine is all about containers. And I'm a ship's agent, and Mr. Bruce Clark from CMA thought that it would be a good idea if somebody spent a few moments at the Leadership Symposium explaining what a ship's agent is. And I am a ship's agent, but I'm a very particular kind of ship agent. I'm a ship agent for bulk ships. And so all of my comments this morning are going to be focused on a significant part of the maritime industry, which is huge, which focuses on specifically what Dave Carlisle called yesterday was like bulk shipments like coal. So in order to be able to frame some of the little interesting tidbits that I will share at the end of my presentation, we want to make a few definitions. First of all, we don't do container ships like Mr. Edwin does here. We do bulk ships. Bulk ships differentiate substantially from containers because containers are taking a whole lot of little shipments in containers, whereas bulk ships generally take just one cargo from one load port to one discharge port. Now, I'm a little nervous giving this in front of this group because half the people out here have no idea what I'm talking about, and the other half probably know more about it than I do. So I'm trying to weave this very carefully. And there's always going to be exceptions to what I'm going to say, but I mean, this is just to give you the rough idea. Okay, one port and one discharge port, and usually it's just one commodity. And I'm going to go over, and those kind of bulk ships are divided into two major groups, one that carries liquid stuff and one that carries stuff that's not liquid, stuff that you have to put on, you pour on and pick off with like grabs and stuff. Okay. One of the things that I want to go into now is in the kinds of cargo that a ship agency does, and then I'll get into what exactly a ship agent does for those cargoes and what he doesn't do. And I'm going to qualify this a little bit, that I actually, although I've been kicked out of most ports in the United States, I currently live for the last 10 years in Northern California. And so to illustrate some of these cargoes, I'm a little bit Northern California centric. And so I apologize to Southern California if I seem to focus on Northern California cargoes. The number one bulk cargo in the Bay Area is oil. And we have 5 refineries in Northern California, and they bring in a lot of crude oil, which then they in turn process and make into other products like fuel oil, diesel, naphtha, and a long list of items, which in turn, some of those products are actually exported on tankers. Now, the interesting thing about a refinery is that when you take you boil it and you take off the jet fuel, and then you wind up with really heavy oil at the bottom, and it's a process. At the very end of it, you have waste product. So whenever you have a refinery, you're going to have waste product. The two most popular waste products from refineries is sulfur, which is kind of that stinky yellow stuff, and a thing called pet coke. I was afraid that if I said pet coke, what's that? Well, when you finish refining all that crude oil, you wind up with like black sand. And that black sand we call pet coke. And that is basically what it is. It's pure carbon, or almost pure carbon. And it's used as a fuel. A lot of places in the world, like Cuba, I understand that's the primary way that they make energy in Cuba, which I've got a guy that works at one of my agencies, so I know more than the average guy about Cuba. But it's also carbon like in tires. Korea uses it to make tires. And we bring in whole shiploads, and a bulk ship is just a big shoebox, and we put all that cargo in it, and it goes away. So that is, now there's other kind of bulk cargoes that might not, I don't know whether you guys are aware of how many bulk cargoes go out of here. We export sulfur. We're just starting now to work on coal. Like David talked yesterday, California is a major rice producer, and we have some bulk rice that we pour onto the ship here in Sacramento. We also mostly send out bagged rice, which we're picking up. Maybe they come in big totes or sacks, about a ton apiece, and we pick them up like 18 at a time and drop them into the shoebox. And that's a kind of a bulk ship called neo-bulk, where you're not really pouring it on, you're just cars, lumber. Another product that we have a couple of places in the San Francisco Bay that export whole shiploads of bulk of scrap, where you're just taking a big grab and filling up the shoebox full of scrap. We have a place in Pittsburgh and other ports in the area that bring in steel products. The ports that I work with are mostly Port of Stockton and Redwood City, Port of Sacramento. There's other ports, Benicia, Richmond. So those are the kinds of cargoes. So, big deal. What does a ship agent do? Now, you could think that a ship agent works for the ship owner, and pretty much that is true. But for the purposes of what I do and what Transmarine does, the ship agent really is the fellow that helps the ship get to the dock and gets the ship, makes the arrangements for the ship to get to the dock and then leave. So what we wind up doing is as opposed to the container ship, there are big companies that go back and forth to the same ports a lot of times. So the container company a lot of times has an office wherever they go because it's the same places they go to on the tramp. And we've got thousands of ship owners. Well, our customers as a tramp ship agent has maybe anywhere from 1 to several hundred ships. And they don't have enough resources to have a ship wherever they send their ship to. So a few decades ago, God invented a thing called a ship agent, and that's a guy that the ship owner or operator can hire to spend the money because the pilots and the ports, they don't like sending their bills to Russia or South Africa or England. They want somebody here locally. So the ship agent as a bulk ship agent like Transmarine is a very limited focus of just that vessel port call. And my favorite analogy, I like using the butler or the concierge, but actually my all-time favorite metaphor for what an agent does is a wedding planner. And it's a wedding planner because there's a lot of people that come to a lot of weddings, or some weddings, not my wedding, but a lot of people. It costs a lot of money in some cases, and it's over with. The port call is over with. And so when I'm trying to introduce myself and say, well, I'm a ship agent, or they think that I'm a pilot. Or they think that they go, oh, you're a pilot. Oh, are you a tug? You run a tug? No. Am I a broker? I don't fix this cargo. I'm not the real estate broker that says, okay, let's put this money on here. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to help the ship operator get that ship to the dock and away. So, let's get down to exactly what the day of a day in the life of a ship agent. Some ship operators made a contract with some cargo entity to come here and pick up a load of coal. So then some way or another he gets a hold of our agency and he sends me an appointment. Well, we run around as soon as we get that appointment and we get the size of the ship, we get what exactly the cargo is, what dock it's going to go to, and we do little things like, and these things have already been checked out, but we like to just to make double sure, to make sure that there's enough water for this particular ship with the arrival draft to get to that dock, that there's enough water at the dock, so it's going to stay afloat the whole time. It can get under the bridges, not hit any bridges. We figure out how much money that we're going to spend. Now I find this is really interesting. We take all that money that we're going to spend. I'm not bidding the job. I'm like your lawyer. I'm going to say, okay, I think this is what it's going to cost you, but it's your money. I'm your agent. I'm got your power of attorney. So if it goes south on it, you're going to pay for it. I'm not. But I think it's going to cost you $50,000. So then I send him my what we call pro forma. I'm going to throw in a few words here just so you think that I know what I'm talking about. The pro forma is kind of the price or the estimate, and then they send us the money. And in my old age, you know what, I don't pick up the phone unless I have the money in here. There's a saying at Transmarine that we don't give credit, we give change. So I get the $50,000, and a port cost as an example is roughly the kind of ships that we're bringing into Northern California. Port cost is about, say, $50,000 to $100,000. Well, but if you do that times our little agency, this branch, I got 9 U.S. offices, but in this particular Northern California, we're doing 30 to 40 ships a month. Okay, well, my calculator says that comes over to $2 million. It's $2 million that we're spending of somebody else in Russia or England or South Africa. You guys don't see them, you see me. So I get to be a really popular guy because I'm spending just this one office. There's a dozen agencies in San Francisco. I'm not the only one. Spending $2 million, so that we're real popular guys. That makes us There's some really big numbers thrown around here, and millions and billions, but for a little ex-longshoreman guy, spending $2 million a month is a big deal, and we take that real seriously. And so what we and we spend it with a lot of you, and it's not just, the biggest part of that expense is the tugs, the lines, and the pilots, and getting to the dock. We don't load and unload the ship. That's the cargo interest. Because when the ship owner rents it to the cargo guy, the ship owner, all he's going to do to carry it. The ship gets alongside, then I stop. And the guy that rented the ship, the cargo interest, generally speaking, he's the one that has to load it and unload it. He has to load it to the satisfaction of the chief mate that it's secure on the ship, but we don't load it. And what's interesting is our $2 million a month for the 30 or 40 ships, that is only to get the ship to the dock in a way. It costs twice that to load or discharge it, but we don't pay that. So we just make sure that they don't ruin the ship when they load it, and the ship won't sink when it goes to the next place. Now, that's the basic primer on what a ship agent does. Just a couple little tidbits I'm going to throw in here. This is like a huge poker game. There's a lot of money. There's really big players. All of my customers are the ship owners, or ship operators. Actually, that's interesting. The guys that own the ships, really just want to rent the ship out to a guy to operate the ship. Most of my customers are not the ship owners. There's online directories called Lloyd's Online. If you pay a lot of money, you can go see all the details about the ship and see all the owners. So you go to the Marine Exchange and you see the name of the ship and you see the owner of the ship. You think, I'm working for that owner of the ship. I'm not. There's somebody else that has rented that ship or chartered that ship to make money with it, and that's the guy that's hiring me. Now, if it was just a matter of me finding up the operator that was using General Steamship, I can go to that website and find the name of that operator, but that's not the guy that's using my competitive agent. So I'm an old guy. I get lost every once in a while, so I have to. There's a lot of money to be made in bulk shipping. I mean, we work for the ship operators, but the really big person is the trader. The trader, an example of a trader, I don't know if David's here, is a guy that puts the deal together. He's the guy that goes to some continent on the world and buys some product cheaper, makes arrangements for a ship, and has that ship carry that cargo to another continent where he can sell it for a lot more money. It's a business deal. And there's huge companies in the world that's what they do. And there are some of the names that you're probably familiar with. They're Mitsubishi and Marubeni and the Morgan Stanley, and there's traders. The largest private company in Europe is Trafigura. These are traders. Now, here's another little interesting anomaly about being a bulk ship agent. When you get a charter, a whole ship, you get to the whole ship, that's a lot of money. You know, that's $50,000 a day for a 14-day voyage and 5 days load and 5 days discharge. That's a lot of money. Most people can't play at this particular poker table. Really big companies can take the risk because they can lose a lot of money on that. One of the things they do when they hire the ship owner, they say, oh, this is a little known secret. I'm going to let you know. This isn't being taped, is it? Oh, it is. Whoops. 90% of our business comes from the cargo interest telling the ship owner, oh, by the way, I want to rent your ship. I would like you to use Transmarine navigation. Okay, fine, good. So that is one of the interesting tidbits. Another tidbit is that all of these companies that I just threw out there compete with each other a lot for a lot of money. And I'm the butler. I'm the servant. I'm really the lowest guy on the totem pole. But I know everybody's business. I know all the big traders. I know all the big shippers at one time or another. So I have to be very careful about what I say, because if I tell you about your business, which you're asking me all the time about his business. If I tell you about his business, which I know, a lot of it I know, in that moment I lose 2 customers. I lose his because I just told him about your business, and I lose your business too, because if I tell about his business, I'm going to tell about your business. So I really can't be very specific about a lot of the bulk shipping. But, so why do you guys care? Well, the punchline of this is that if you know bulk agents, ship agents, they know a lot of people. They go to a lot of meetings. They have to spend all that money. It's in their best interest to make sure that they spend that money wisely. And so I get to go to a lot of meetings. And I've been doing this for, I mean, this is a little embarrassing. I'm sorry that you had to read that.
I've had worse assignments.
Well, there's 2 embarrassing parts about that. One, I don't really like to let people know officially that I was a longshoreman, because I can't be that bright if I was no longer a longshoreman after I once was a longshoreman. And 2, I've been doing this pretty much the same job, this is confession time, the same job for over 40 years, mostly for the same company. Now, it's a little bit of a compromise. This is the 3rd time that Transmarine brought me back, but I'm not, they don't really know what I'm doing, so they're going to keep hiring me until, and I don't expect you guys to tell them anything. So, I have a couple of things at the end here. My favorite poem is called The Agent. I don't have enough for everybody, but I'll have this out at the front desk, and this is just a cute little ditty about what a ship agent is called, Call the Ship Agent. And I've got a couple of really cool books that I'm not going to give to you guys, but this is a book written by the manager of the shipping Marine Money, and it's my favorite giveaway book. This is a book that explains in a very easy novel about the shipping business. If you're interested in bulk ships, I would really recommend this book. So thank you very much. I very much enjoyed the opportunity to talk about bulk shipping today, and I was really honored to be invited to make this presentation. Thank you.
Now, we'll, before we move on to the next speaker, I did have one quick question for Mr. Nickson. What's the gorilla for?
Oh, the gorilla. I don't normally do this in front of such an august group. Can you hear me okay? No? Do you want to hear me? Mostly what I do is I train people that want to come work for Transmarine, or people at CMA, or Coast Guard folks, and it's much smaller groups than this and not nearly as knowledgeable to criticize what I say. But in my life as a bulk ship agent, there is a 900-pound gorilla. And that, in my life, is the captain of the port. And I have one on my desk to keep me reminded of that all the time.
All right. Thank you very much, Bill. Our next speaker is Mr. Edward Zaninelli, who is the Vice President of Trans-Pacific Westbound Trade for OOCL. And Mr. Zaninelli is currently, or has 38 years in the transportation industry, starting out in the trucking industry, followed by 13 years with Sealand Services, 5 years with Ned Lloyd USA, and now 20 years with OOCL. Mr. Zaninelli's experience encompasses not only sales experience, but also operations, pricing, and customer service in multiple trade lanes from South America, the Caribbean, Atlantic trade, and most recently the Pacific trade, where it has been his major focus for the last 13 years. In dealing with customers and products of OOCL, Mr. Zaninelli has gained a great amount of experience in the Asian market. OOCL is, of course, a leader in Asia trade, and and for the balance of Pacific Rim for North America. Mr. Zaninelli is greatly involved in the flow of traffic by ship, rail, truck throughout North America and Asia. Mr. Zaninelli holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Moravian College, located in Pennsylvania. Please welcome Mr. Edward Zaninelli.
The only reason I have a Bachelor of Science is they didn't give criminology titles to your graduation back then, which is why I'm in shipping. These are kind of interesting events. Mostly the trick is to get through it and not stumble. And when I say stumble, not say something that Bill here will write about and then I'll hear about in 2 days from Hong Kong. So we'll see if we can get through this and not cause too much trouble. Where is the, oh, here it is, okay. So right now in the world, we have a protracted global economic growth stagnation. Everybody knows Europe is particularly in deep and dire situation, possibly into a third dip, particularly in the UK. Asia is also going through transition where the flow of cargo is really starting to change from centric to China. Parts of it are moving south into Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh area, subcontinent. A lot of movement, a lot of changes and I think a lot quicker than we expected. We expected it to happen maybe in 20 years. I think it's happening more like in 11 or 12 years. I got to work two things at once here, so this will be interesting. North America export growth has slowed slightly, although right now, if someone said to me what's going on, we're having quite a surge at this point in time. That happens in the fall, in the late winter. That's your busiest time for exports. That's when you're cleaning out all the silos to get rid of the grains. It's when you're buying restocking material on the other side for making a lot of the things that get imported back into the United States. And we have a slower year-on-year growth, but we have a significant surge going on in the market right now. Credit remains really tight. As everybody knows, there's tons of money out there. You just can't have it, right? You've got a 900 score on your credit report, and they go, well, you missed a payment 4 years ago of $32. And we don't know if we can loan you any money. Southern California will always be surplus in space on the exports. And I'll show a slide later that shows you how large Southern California, LA, Long Beach is and the impact that they have on the Western scene. Central California's deficit on equipment. What do we mean by deficit on equipment? More cargo goes out than cargo comes in, even when you figure out the weight discrepancy. What is the weight discrepancy? Everybody probably wants to know what that means, okay? The cargo coming in, TV sets, CDs, DVD players, weighs about 10 tons a container, average. The cargo going out, rocks, trees, and dirt, weighs about 20 tons. That's if you're lucky. The only thing that actually is light is used autos. Everything else weighs 24 to 26 tons, which is why we have a real weight problem on the export loads. A 10,000 TEU ship import is a 7,200 TEU ship export. You weight out the ship, you got to load the empties on so you can bring back the eastbound again, which pays most of the way. So there's a real discrepancy in the type of commodities that come in and the type of commodities that go out. We have mega ships coming on, and this is going to change the climate. They're infiltrating, of course, into Asia, Europe first, because Europe can handle much larger ships than North America can right now. We have draft problems, we have production problems, we have some real challenges. I think we'll work through them and get things straightened out in that respect. On the East Coast, we actually have an air draft problem at one port that will prevent the really large ships from coming in for quite a while. but they are going to address that, and that'll be a good thing in the New York Harbor, because that's where most of the inbound in the East Coast really needs to get to, because you've got that 60 million people zone up there in the New York area. And then we got mega alliances forming. Very shortly, it's been announced there'll be what's called the G6 on the East Coast. Part of that is probably in response to some of the mega carriers that are out there. Some carriers are so large they can run almost a daily service. In response to that, some of the smaller carriers group together in association so that they can compete with the same number of ships and offer the same kind of services and split the space up on the ships, share the space, share the costs, and be competitive against even a mega carrier. And that's the real objective of alliances, is just cost sharing and competitiveness. There's no secret means to change. We can't talk about rates. We can't do an awful lot of things that some people worry about. The whole idea is to be competitive against the mega carriers that can do some things that we can't. Slow steaming. What is slow steaming? Everybody here, if anybody here owns a boat, you know what slow steaming is. You're going 9 knots now. You used to go 20 because you burn your fuel so fast that you can't actually afford to go out in the boat. It's the same thing with our ships. If you go 23 knots, you're going to burn maybe $500,000 a day just in fuel. If you go 16, 17 knots, maybe you'll burn $350,000 in fuel. Those are just estimates. So the object of slow steaming is to save money, because the cost of bunker now at around $640 a ton is extremely high, and the biggest impact on the bottom line for shipping lines. What is bunker? We talked about the dust that's left at the end of the refining cycle. Just prior to that, they come out with a glob of goo that looks something like macadam or blacktop on a road. We re-refine that and burn it in the ships. In fact, every ship has a refinery on it that keeps this stuff hot and allows it to flow, and that's what we burn in the ships. And that price of that product continues to go up, because in the refining processes, I'm being told that they actually have gotten better and better in refining, and they're actually coming out with less bunker. It's not just the barrel price, because when the barrel was at 140, bunker was not at 640. But what's happening now is it's becoming more supply and demand on bunker. They're re-refining the products to the point of where bunker is going to be a little bit more dear, and that's why we're coming up with more efficient ships, different types of engines, and things that can really help us. Structural overcapacity. Everybody wants a bigger ship. Everybody wants a bigger market share. There are a lot of factors involved in shipping, containerized shipping, that are not normal to business. And when I talk about not normal to business, there's a lot of government interference. There's a lot of government ownership. And sometimes governments don't have a bottom line. And that makes it very difficult for independent carriers to compete against carriers that possibly have different sources of revenue and different sources of structural support. Fuel cost, I talked about that already. $640 a ton on bunker is killing us, causing losses in most of the industry. The industry has not made any real money for almost 3 years now. There won't be any good announcements coming out in the next month and a half on profits from last year. It's a difficult business to be in, and it's extremely asset-based. You have to spend billions of dollars to have the right ships and the right ports. And I'll talk about some money that's being spent in California by OOCL in a little while. This 1% sulfur fuel, 200 miles out, environmental push to help clean the air. We fully understand and agree with it. The problem is passing on the cost. It's not something that we can absorb, and we're going to have to pass the cost on. It's something that is coming in by January 2014, 200 miles out. Right now, we do it from 24 miles out. We voluntarily go ahead and do this, and we get acknowledgement that we're doing it at 100%. OOCL's been at 100% on the 24-mile. We'll be at 100% on the 200-mile when it comes in. It's just something that you have to do for the environment. We don't have a problem with that, and we'll be working hard on that. In 2013, outbound forecast for growth 4 to 5% exports. That is okay, except for the growth in space, the amount of TEU. TEU is 20-foot equivalent. So we got 20-footers, we have 40-footers. We tend to count everything in 20-foot equivalents. A 20-foot equivalent ship, 10,000 TEUs, is going to become the standard on the West Coast probably within the next 2 years. But the problem is the amount of space being added on is more like 9% versus the 4 to 5% growth that we expect. And then you add into it that discount you get on exports because they weigh more, and we're actually adding probably more like 11 or 12% on exports, 9% on the imports. The transatlantic outbound growth is probably going to be 2 to 3%. Transatlantic is also an important segment of exports out of North America, except for it's a balanced trade. Actually, the weights in and out are almost the same. The commodities vary. They're a little different than the rocks, trees, and dirt that we send to Asia. It's a little bit more in finished products, a little bit more in food products. Both food products in, food products out. We send cheese over, they send cheese back. We send cheddar over, they send something French back. You know, it's an interesting trade. But it's a little bit more of a boutique trade. And if someone doesn't throw a very large ship into it, it's a very well-balanced trade, and it's very profitable and something that we enjoy doing, that's for sure. The Trans-Pacific remains eastbound driven. We import, we buy couches, we buy furniture, we buy TVs. What's the cost of moving a TV? Last year at the TPM, somebody asked that question, and I think they came out with $3.25 to import a TV. So it's a real deal on the ocean. We actually don't charge enough for a lot of what we do, but I'm sure if any shippers are here, they'd love to argue with that, about that. Equipment imbalance is a real challenge. When we put a piece of equipment in Chicago, the BN doesn't say, hey, thanks for the inbound, we'll move it out for you for nothing. Nah. We'll charge you the same as we did for the load going in, for the empty coming out. So that generates the need for exports, which generates a significant push to price below cost, which makes the outbound trade a very difficult trade and definitely subservient to the inbound trade in regards to profitability and regaining at least cost cover, which doesn't happen on the exports. In California, I threw these in there from another presentation because I felt that this was California-centric, and I'm not picking on California, but California is as large a shipping area as almost every other country in the world that we go to. So what happens is you have operation zones. Shanghai operation zone, all the cargo comes from around Shanghai. They book locally. They don't book anything out of Japan. They don't book anything out of Hong Kong. They don't book anything out of Singapore. In California, you have 3 major ports, and it's as large as any other operating zone, which would be one operating zone, Shanghai. But in North America, we have 69 operational zones because of the scope of North America. And you can have a customer in New York that books his cargo in Houston and ships it out of California. The problem is he can be shipping it from 300 or 400 miles away from the port, which doesn't happen as much in almost any other country in the world. Everybody else is trucking from the local plant. But here we're trucking from the farms that are hundreds of miles away. We've got to get containers to places where the inbound does not go, so they got to round trip the container. So it's a very difficult and much more costly matchback operation. And in California, we don't have the heavyweight zones that compete. We're building our roads to 129,000-pound capability. We're not using them. There's a lot of arguments about safety and all that. According to the statistics, I think, and it should be checked out by somebody, weight doesn't really matter in safety. But it's important that we find ways to get inland. We're working on something in Stockton, I know, but there's not rivers everywhere in the California zone. So we need to find a way, I think, to mimic what Virginia does, to mimic what Georgia does, to mimic what some of the other states do on helping to get heavyweight zones so that people can move the cargo. Unfortunately, exports weigh a lot more. A load of TVs, 9,000 pounds. A load of just grapes will weigh 44,000 pounds. A load of fruit and nuts, probably 52. Waste paper. I'll talk about some of the commodities. You'll be shocked at what our biggest exports are. And it's just something that I would like to mention. I think it's something that should be looked at by everybody that's in this room, and it's something that definitely affects the ability to compete in the global market. Inland options, Front Royal in Virginia is a good option. A lot of people using that. The state of South Carolina is developing an inland port using rail, not using barge. And these are some of the options that maybe have to be looked at into the future. The westbound market is really complicated. Eastbound's kind of, I don't mean to pick on my eastbound brethren. They make the money, but it's simple. It's a lot of port to port. It's a lot of stuff going to the same distribution center. A big customer may have 10 plants. Not a Walmart, they'll have 10,000 plants, but a big customer can have 10 plants, 10 port lanes coming into LA, coming into Oakland, and go into certain distribution centers, maybe 2 or 3 more in the United States. A company like DuPont will have 6,500 port lanes in their contract, and every week they come up with a new port lane. Really complicated, really difficult, because they're selling container loads of product that go to all sorts of different plants worldwide. So the scope of North America, 3,000 miles by 1,500 miles, is really a bear to tackle. Having the containers for the export where they're needed is also another big challenge. About half the containers end up where we need them for exports. The other half have to be moved at a cost. Overall costs for carriers are climbing. The rail cost on fuel is astronomical. And there's no give and take. There's no negotiation. Every time I turn my computer on, notice 40% surcharge on fuel, especially now with prices seem to be going up at this point in time. Operational zones in the U.S., I talked about that. There's 69 operational zones for OOCL. I'm sure all the other carriers have their way of dividing up all the operations in North America. Very difficult, very complex. One reason customer service is a lot harder in North America is because of the complexity. If you don't have a system, which OOCL does have, that can really handle it, your customer service levels are a lot less, or you have to put a lot more manpower, which means a lot more cost into them. The weight of the commodities is a challenge. TEU market focus is something that all the carriers do, unfortunately, including OOCL, otherwise we wouldn't have any cargo. When we talk about TEU, that's 20-foot equivalent. Should you be focused on a 20-foot equivalent? Should you be focused on cost and on reclaiming that cost? And that's the difference between lines that make money and lines that don't make money. If you're focused on TEU, you're probably not making money. If you're focused on cost and cost recovery, you're probably at least getting by in this day and age. Equipment locations, we talked about already, and equipment repo saving is really a driver. Budgets, hundreds of millions of dollars in budgets for the major carriers just in repositioning of empty equipment in North America. Not worldwide, just North America. Huge cost for all of us. Port marine terminals and on-dock expansion faced a lot of environmental scrutiny in California. OOCL is in the beginning stages of a construction project which will now take 10 years. It's called the Middle Harbor Development. We're going to put $4.6 billion into the California economy with that. Actually, it's going to be closer to $6 billion. The Port of Long Beach is also putting in $1.5+ billion for construction. And I'll show you some pictures later of that. We're really proud of this, and it's going to be quite a feat, I think, and quite a step forward in the capabilities of North America to compete with the rest of the world. Near dock rail expansion, the BNSF. I'm not here to support the BNSF, the Burlington Northern Railroad, but we do not have a near dock facility in Southern California. It's been proposed for 8 years. We have to truck the loads in from Hobart, 26 miles away. We're killing the environment. We're wasting truck power on hauling just between the rail and the ports, and we need that near dock facility to get done. I think there's some last reviews going on that. I hope it gets supported by everybody here. It's something that will help the environment. It'll make you much more competitive in California because not everything can go on dock. On-dock rail has limited capability because the volumes have outgrown a lot of the port sizes. So we got to have the near dock, and we've got to get closer to the heavyweight zone in order to move the cargo. So hopefully that's something that will happen in the near future. Rails are continuing to invest in intermodal. I think the rails have done a really good job. They're putting major facilities, LPC in Chicago, a really modern, up-to-date facility, good infrastructure on the rail for containerization. And I think the rails overall here and in Canada have done a pretty good job on that. Rail fuel surcharges are really up. There's not much we can do about that. It's just part of the way the contracts are. So how do we divide the cargo in California? 70% of the cargo is LA and Long Beach. 70% of all the cargo on the West Coast comes in through LA and Long Beach, which means a lot of the containers are in LA and Long Beach. I haven't noticed any trees growing outside of Long Beach lately. That's one of the problems is you've got the Pacific Northwest, Tacoma, Seattle are 17% of the space, but they've got all the trees. The forest products, a huge exporter. Agricultural products, huge exporters. Hay, rich in minerals. I wish 50% of the freight was coming in through Seattle and Long Beach, not to hurt California, but it would be nice because all the exports are up there. So we end up with a lot of intermodal coming back through LA and Long Beach, and that's one of the ways we're able to use all that extra space that we have that comes in through LA and Long Beach. Portland, you see, is 0.8%, 9.8, and Oakland is almost 12%. That's the way that the volumes are split up on the West Coast in the Asia services. Now, if you look down below, you see some ratios. So what do those ratios mean? The 2-to-1, basically for Long Beach and LA, means for every one container that can go out, 2 are coming in. So obviously you end up with a super surplus, which is why you're constantly trying to move more cargo through LA and Long Beach to cut costs. Oakland, I don't know why that happened. You guys will fix that. Oakland is at 0.8, which means there's more outbound than inbound in Oakland. We're imbalanced in Oakland, deficit equipment. We actually charge more for cargo out of Oakland. We have to. It's just part of the nature because the inbound doesn't match the outbound. Oakland gets more pass-through cargo that might be going inland, but sometimes those empties don't come back to Oakland. They come back to other locations, or they get used inland. So that makes Oakland very tough to compete against and a little bit more difficult to find equipment at. Tacoma has a good balance, but Tacoma, as I mentioned before, Pacific Northwest has all those natural resources. And the lumber and the forest products really drive things up there and can really fill ships up. I wish you could see this. What I have here is a chart on all the commodities. See if we can get that up. I have a chart on all the commodities. And if you were to see this chart, we'll imagine the chart's up there, okay? On the left-hand side, there's a chart. Here we go. Here we go. There's the chart. Hopefully you won't lose it. On the left-hand side, you see that big red spike that's over 20% of the entire market. Now, unfortunately, you probably can't read what's down on the bottom there, but that's 21% of the entire market. That's waste paper. That's our biggest and largest single commodity out of North America. Second largest single commodity out of North America at 11% is scrap. Not very dynamic, guys. But these things happen when you have big populations and you have wealthy populations and you create a lot of waste. And those waste products can be recycled at a cheaper price than the ores and recycling real forest products into paper. It's much cheaper to recycle the paper and it's good for the environment. Then we get into chemicals, feed, and what this chart really shows you is this is how we look at this is how OOCL looks at the export market. How do we find the cargo we want? And what mix of cargo do we want? Now I'm actually showing you the volumes that OOCL does there in the blue lines. And you'll notice, if you could see it, we overperform in cotton, we overperform in autos. That's because those commodities are lighter weight and actually pay more than waste paper and some of the other commodities. So the challenge in exports is to find the right mix that gives you the best return on investment. Not just like working a portfolio for stock, anything else you would do. We try and pick and choose in the market what part of that market will give us the best returns, and that's how we figure out what cargo we want to carry. And when you look at California, and you talk about fruit and nuts, and you talk about the agri products, and you talk about a lot of the frozen and fresh produce markets, that's a lot of cargo that you really want to handle. And it's one reason why California is so dynamic in the world market for exports, and why they have 70% of the cargo in LA and Long Beach, and why California are the biggest ports in North America, period, where most of the cargo comes in. So what do we got here? We've got a little story about the ships and capital investment. This is not a cheap operation. We can't just find some old breakbulk ship, not to pick on breakbulk ships, and make it work. That's the Nimitz on the left. You'll see it's outsized by an 8,800 TEU ship, which are now hardly being built. There's a few more going to come out in the next couple of years, but those are becoming the standard size ship in the industry. And then that's slightly dwarfed by the Eiffel Tower, but that's dwarfed by the 13,000 TEU ships, of which we just christened 2 last week. And there are carriers that are doing 15 and 16,000, and there's rumors of a 30,000 TEU plan. I don't know what they're going to do with that thing. You know, maybe put them together and we'll just drive across. I'm not sure. But, you know, I try and think of how much port time you're going to have on these. We're worried about the port time on 13,000 TEU ships, let alone something that would be even, you know, twice that size. We think 13,000 is the right size to go with. Other people might be thinking the 15 is right. If you're really heavy into Europe, bigger is better. In the U.S., we're going to have to be careful. Not all the terminals in L.A. and Long Beach can handle 13,000 TEU ships, but I will show you one that can shortly. So this is L.A. and Long Beach, and, whoops, is there a, yeah, here's a, so right here is what we call LBCTI. LBCTI is a 107-acre facility operated by OOCL in the Port of Long Beach. Over here is what used to be called the cut terminal. It's closed right now. And then you see the waterway in between. After a significant amount of time to get the environmental studies done, we are in the process now of rebuilding this port. And this port will turn into this. And what this will be is 327 acres. And all your outside trucking will come in and use these roads to access the terminal, but they will not be allowed in this area here. This area will be totally automated. And it will not have a single person in it. There will be people back rooms with sticks, joysticks, driving the cranes. There will be more jobs created from this port, which is very good for the longshoremen. We've gotten super support, I think, from the longshoremen on this. And we're very happy to see this finally in the stages of being built. They're going to first build this section over here, will be the old terminal. They'll keep using that until they get this section done here. Then we'll switch over to this half of the terminal, use that, while the last 4 or 5 years will finish this. There'll be 13 rail ramps into this facility, so we'll be able to do all the on-dock that we need to do by rail. And we're looking forward to it. It's a significant investment in California. It's over $1 billion from OOCL just in land and equipment. It's $1.5 billion by the Port of Long Beach, a 40-year lease. At the end, we'll spend about $6 billion in California on this, plus all the jobs that will be created. And there'll be a lot more jobs than there would have been at the old terminal. And we're really excited about this. And I'm happy to stand here and say we've got a real investment going on in California, which I think makes it appropriate to be talking to you guys. That's it. If there's any questions or later on somebody wants to ask me something, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Martin Gundersen. He is a professor of electrical engineering, electrophysics, chemical engineering, and materials science, physics and astronomy at the University of Southern California. Fight on. And he has served as chair of the Department of Electrical Engineering, Electrophysics, and his research is primarily in the applied sciences. Dr. Gundersen has published approximately 350 papers, is a Life Fellow of the IEEE, and is a Fellow of the Optical Society of America. He received the Germishausen Award of the IEEE Power Modulator Symposium and the USC Viterbi School of Engineering Senior Research Award. Dr. Gundersen's current active research is in the physics and applications of pulsed power, emissions reduction, and energy efficiency, and medical and agricultural applications of pulsed power. Please don't ask me to say that again. I am very pleased, though. I really enjoy people like Dr. Gundersen because they spend their time working on it. I like to push the buttons. I think many people in here do too. He spends his time working on what's going on behind that button. And so anyway, Dr. Gundersen key focus this morning will be an overview of pulsed power research burning more fuel efficiently. Please welcome Dr. Martin Gundersen.
Thank you. Okay, so this will be a little different from the previous talks because I'm a absent-minded professor. I forgot my wristwatch and I was trying to set up my timer on this and ended up boinging during Bill's talk. So I apologize for that. This is a research project and it'll be kind of an overview of it. Some of my colleagues that are working with me, one of them's here, Angus McCall, and it's supported by the Tai Chong Chang Shipping Company in Hong Kong and represents a vision of the leadership of that company. Oh. Okay, there. So this is Angus and my boss on the left, Yanis Yortsos, who's the Dean of Engineering at USC, and Kenneth Koo, who leads the TCC group. And this is really an outgrowth of Kenneth Koo's vision, which I'll describe in the next slide. I do want to mention that a lot of the research has been supported over the years by sources, including especially the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, the Office of Naval Research, the National Science Foundation, and other groups. And there's even a little bit of naval stuff there. There's the Naval Postgraduate School. I have a affiliation there as a visiting professor, and we do some of our work there. So this is just a quote pulled from Lloyd's list. Shipping must take the lead role over climate change. Whether or not we believe in global warming, can we really take the risk of doing nothing? And basically supported by the TCC group, we're endeavoring to do something about marine diesel, and it's in a kind of a fundamental way. The basic enabling thing that we're doing is enabled by pulsed power technology. So, and I'll show you that. Successful research is a challenge, and basically the message of this, I think, is that research should be done. It's risky. Sometimes it doesn't work, but research got all the lights on in this room with the electricity and magnetism came along very recently in history. It's barely 150 years old, and it's air conditioning, buildings this big with elevators. There's just so many things that have come out of that. And we see research in other areas, advances being made in disease such as cancer. So my message, if anything, is that we really should explore the technology itself and try to see how that can be built better, because it'll fundamentally change the game if it's successful. So here's our research program. We're trying to improve marine diesel engine efficiency using this pulse power technology, and we're basically trying to reduce emissions, and maybe the second is the most important thing. Mr. Ku's thought is that given whatever figures you would use for emissions of CO2, CO2 is probably the major actor in global warming, and it sort of radiates infrared energy back to the Earth. Ocean shipping produces, it's been estimated, something like 3% of the CO2. So here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to integrate a thing called a transient plasma, which is kind of a fancy spark, into a diesel engine. And I don't know what happened. Maybe I pushed something wrong here. So I did want to use PowerPoint. I know everybody's seen enough PowerPoints for a lifetime, but we had some pictures in here, so if we can pull that back up. But to move the talk along, I'll just sort of try to tell you what we're doing. So my research over the years has involved pulse power, and I want to show you in the next couple of slides, which will show up shortly, what pulse power is. We have innovated our pulse power to produce very short pulses that are a few nanoseconds long, and a nanosecond is, one way to think of a nanosecond is light goes about that far in the room in a nanosecond. And so we have pulses where we have high voltage and sort of high current at the same time for a short time. And so what we do is we take the energy in a traditional spark, like is in your car, that might persist, that might be introduced into the arc of a spark plug for about a millisecond, and we compress that millisecond. We keep the energy about the same, so the energy's low, at 50 millijoules or something like that. And we compress that from a millisecond down to maybe 10 or 20 nanoseconds. 12 nanoseconds is a typical number. So it's ballpark about a factor of 10,000 shorter in time. So the energy is the same, it's low, but the peak power is very high. Now what that can do in a fuel-air mixture is cause the fuel-air mixture to ignite a little differently. And we have a lot of evidence for that, and we've done a lot of research on that. What happens is the electrons that are produced during this short time with the high peak power and are emitted into your chamber have higher energy. They have higher energy than a traditional spark. A traditional spark is actually a very cold electron source. It's a thermal source. It kind of provides some localized heating that ignites things. But our electrons are the electrons that are in the formative phase of that arc, and we use this 12 nanoseconds to produce those electrons and then just turn everything off before the electrons cool off. So we use more energetic electrons, kind of beam-like electrons, you could say. And what they do is they produce a different chemistry. They cause molecules to fall apart. They cause molecules to ionize. And these molecules are much more reactive. They just react like crazy. And there are better terms to describe that, but I'll just leave it with that. But they're very reactive. And this initiates a different kind of chemistry. And so we've been exploring this, first by developing the pulse power. And as soon as it comes up, I'll show you some pictures of that. And then by introducing this into various types of engines. So our research has been, it was initially an aerospace application. We were developing a thing called a pulse detonation engine, working with colleagues at the Naval Postgraduate School. We started conducting experiments with Nickson, and we did some of our key engine experiments in Nickson Research Laboratories in Yokohama, Japan. And in those experiments, we saw in their engine, with their engineers making the measurements, about a 30% increase in the pressure in the chamber of their engine, simply swapping out a spark plug and swapping in our igniter. So we used our pulse power and our igniter, and they made the measurements, and they wanted to look closely at our engine and at our pulse power. And we published this, so you can actually read this. So all of this suggested to us that there might be some other applications for this. And two key ones now are this project and another project where we're looking at natural gas. Methane has come on board as a major player, as I'm sure you're pretty familiar with, due to fracking and advanced techniques that are now available. I think a good university position nowadays might be at the University of North Dakota, because there's a huge fracking facility that lights up the sky. Anyway, so let's see, I'm trying to remember the rest of my slides. So where we are is we have what are the problems that we're looking. We picked three engines to kind of work with: a small diesel engine that we have in our laboratory at USC, a modest three-cylinder marine diesel that's at the Naval Postgraduate School, and we're angling for access to a big engine, which I can show you shortly. So we're trying to get our technology into these engines. The major problem that we've encountered with it introduces some physics issues, and in research you do run into problems, is the fact that the diesel engines operate at high pressure, and the marine diesel engines on these large shipping vessels that you were describing are huge pressures, and they're 100 atmospheres and sometimes more. And this introduces a different physics in producing the electrical discharge that we need. So we've kind of gone back to the lab to improve electrodes we need to operate at a somewhat higher voltage, and to understand better our physics that's occurring at these higher pressures. And this is kind of a snapshot of where we are right now as we're trying to work through those issues. And that looks familiar. And, what else do I have to say? I've almost covered the talk, but I do have a couple of pictures if we can bring them up. Yes, okay. Okay, I'm going to push this button here. All right. Nothing's happening.
There you go.
Great, okay. So shipping must take the lead. Been describing that. So we're adding to a diesel engine our igniter. There's a recent picture of most of the group. I'm in the blue jacket. The fellow next to me on my left there is Chris Brophy, who's with the Naval Postgraduate School. But otherwise, it's pretty much my group. And these are the kind of research areas that we do. Core research, nanosecond pulse power, some applications in biomedical, we have an application to wine, and I'll probably skip this entertainment stuff. So this is what pulse power does. It takes energy and compresses it in time, delivers it with high peak power. Here's one of our circuits. It's kind of described in the first 3 bullets here. There's 3 parts to this circuit. And I'll just show this quickly, and we can have a quiz on it at the end of the lecture. This is what people think of as pulse power often, that when you encounter it. This is a huge machine at Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque. It's called the Z machine. It's been rebuilt since this picture was taken, but this has been for a time probably the most famous pulse power picture. So it's a vessel about the size of this room. You can sort of see some stairs around here. And this is filled with water, and it's arcing. And I wonder, all right. Okay, so it's used to operate a thing called a Z-pinch. And the Z-pinch, in the next slide, is a thing about the size of a wrist. It's some wires. And all the energy that's stored in that huge thing goes through this little sleeve with as much current as, it's a couple of megaamps, as you can get into that little sleeve. And because of the magnetic field associated with that current, it compresses, and it produces neutrons and a huge electromagnetic pulse. And it's used for basic research and also some DoD research. So to kind of put it in perspective of pulse power and what its usefulness is and how it's kind of ignored sometimes, in the movie Ocean's 11, pulse power was one of these Z-pinches was used to produce an electromagnetic pulse to shut down Las Vegas so they could rob George Clooney and Matt Damon. And they went to a laboratory and they stole the Z-pinch, which is kind of like this, put it in their van and went to Las Vegas and shut down Las Vegas. But the thing they left behind was that picture I just showed you, which is the power for it. So that's pulse power. Okay, so I've pretty much covered a lot of this stuff. And if I did something with this thing, I'm very sorry. And perhaps I should just see, is there anything else I really need to show you? There are a couple of nice pictures, but maybe if there's time later, and I'll stop.
Martin, to your point, just that the possible efficiency in combustion fuel where you might be able to, get 10 or 20 or 30% efficiency is hopeful when compared to the figure of what's on those costs.
Right. So the impetus was that what we saw with gasoline engines was an increase in chamber pressure of about 30%. And so this suggested that if we could do something, and this is just swapping out a spark plug, and so our high hope was to just introduce something in the glow plug hole or do something like that, but to improve the efficiency of the engine by creating a more complete burn and reduce emissions. Okay, thank you.
I think we all appreciated not only the PowerPoint presentation, but that demonstration of pulse power as part of the PowerPoint. Our next speaker is Mr. Bill Lewicki, who is the Director of Marketing of the Port of Stockton, California. His current work responsibilities focus on marketing the port's maritime facilities for ocean cargo shipping, as well as cargo forecasting, both in the U.S. and international locations. His responsibilities include marketing of the port's distribution centers, cold storage facilities, specialized project cargoes in the energy industry, and heavy equipment industries as well, and developing new business opportunities by teaming with both the Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe railroads. Mr. Lewicki previously served as the marketing manager for the Georgia Ports Authority for 7 years, and he is a graduate, University of Houston, with a Bachelor of Science degree with emphasis in business and international trade. Mr. Lewicki will speak this morning on what a port does to attract vessel operators. Please welcome Mr. Bill Lewicki.
Good morning. And just before we get started, I know the folks over here are just kind of going, and just in case a picture of the screen goes, I'm going to continue, and I'll use my description. I'm going to ask you all to just look at the screen and visualize the slides that will be coming and such, and we get onto it. The panel was on vessel operators. You heard from the container side and also the bulk side. I'm coming from a port perspective. Why does a vessel operator want to use the Port of Stockton? The Port of Stockton, being located in the San Joaquin Valley, we're a river port. Not as glamorous as our sister ports in Oakland and Long Beach and LA. But hopefully in the next couple of slides we'll show you how an innovative business plan by our port executive staff and the support of our commissioners and stuff have helped us build a truly successful entity and how we're going to progress into the future. We have an IT department that likes to put in little graphics. Stockton, for those of you who are not quite sure where we're located, we're about 80 miles due east of San Francisco. We're actually a 72 nautical mile trip from the Bay Area on up to the Port of Stockton. And a lot of times we have vessel operators come to us and they ask us about that 8-hour transit. Why should we go all the way into the interior of California? We can much easily go down to LA Long Beach. And well, we asked them, well, where is your market? Port of Stockton does business with over 55 different countries. So we kind of usually first find out where is the cargo coming from, or where is it going to go to? And inevitably, the majority of the cargo is really Far East based. And one of the interesting things, the analogies we bring up to them, is that we mentioned that 8-hour trip, but if we find out that their cargo is coming from Japan or coming from China or coming from Korea, just examples, and currently using a sister port down south, we kind of mention to them that when you're about 200 nautical miles out from those ports, drop anchor, and you'd be in Stockton. A lot of times the logistics people and such and that are handling transportation don't realize the geographic curvature of the state of California. So that's 200 miles. We're actually 200 miles closer in Stockton to their market than their sister ports that they're currently using. That's 200 miles coming in. That's 200 miles going back out. That's 400 miles. Now you might say, well, that until you start looking like Ed had mentioned, the cost of bunker fuel. Imagine yourself right now coming out to this conference. Last night you said, well, I'll get gas in the morning. And at that time the gas was $3. This morning you pulled into your station, it was $7. So you can imagine what the vessel operators now have to factor in when they're doing business. So we as a port have to present an area, a logistics area that they want to come to, that they want to bring their cargoes to or take cargo from. One of the things that we were very fortunate in with the Port of Stockton is that in the year 2001, we received a conveyance, and that was the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, basically ceded over to us the Rough and Ready Island Naval Complex. When we took that complex over, literally the port doubled in size. Previously our east complex was about 600 plus acres. When we took over the naval base, we added on another 1,440 acres and a number of facilities that we were able now to operate at the port. Today, we currently have over 4,000 total acres under our control. Makes us the third largest landholding port in the state of California. We have over 7 million square feet of covered warehouse storage and basically over 50 miles of railroad track and 12,000 linear feet of dock space, more than 3.5 miles. Makes us one of the largest ports on the West Coast. Now, one of the things that happened after 9/11 was previously and traditionally we work with the Coast Guard to provide security along the ports in this country. After 9/11, Homeland Security took over, and the Coast Guard actually became a department under them. Well, they became, what happened with the ports and they changed is that they introduced to those workers that were going to work on a seaport or even in an airport what's called a transportation worker's identity card. Basically, this little card gets you onto a port airport as an employee and to work the cargoes that come across those docks. Well, one of the things that we had in our conveyance at the port, and what you're looking, the blue outer circle, is what we call today the Port of Stockton. If we use those traditional boundaries that you see there, every business, every person that is working on at a port would have been required to have one of these cards. I would say, well, that's not that big of a deal. Well, one of the stipulations the government put in on this is that they make it very easy to get one. You get the first 6 months, it's like getting a passport. But in that 6-month trial period, they do a background check on you. And any individual that has been convicted of any type of felony will be denied a full card, which would mean, as a port, all of our businesses that are supporting this part area, all of their employees would have this, and any ones that did not qualify wouldn't be able to work on a port. So what we did was we took our actual boundaries and we changed the Port of Stockton. The actual physical port, as you know it now, is within that red area that you see. And what that means is those people that work, and they're primarily the longshoremen. With their contract, they are responsible for loading ships, for discharging cargo. They are the primary users of this. But any additional individuals that would need to go on there, you would have to have a card. At the port, we have a number of us that have gone through qualification to become escorts and to bring people onto the port. If you were a business person and you wanted to see how we operate, one of our individuals would take you and bring you onto that port. Why would you want to come here? What do we have to do? What does the vessel operator do? He carries cargo. He's either going to take outbound cargo to a foreign destination, he's going to bring cargo from a foreign destination. Why does he want to come to Stockton? We had to provide incentives. One of the incentives we have is that our entire port area that you saw is designated Foreign Trade Zone 231. Now, in a foreign trade zone, you get certain inducements. It was instrumental in bringing a major plumbing supply house to our port. Ferguson Pipe Supply came in, they opened up a pipe manufacturing facility. All of their product, the raw materials, the raw pipe, plain and pipe, came from Asia. They brought it into our port, they bring it over to their manufacturing facility, and the composition of that pipe changes. It no longer becomes pipe from China, from Japan, from Korea. It now becomes an American product because it's Americans that are working within their manufacturing facility, and they change the actual physical composition of that pipe. They make use of that foreign trade zone. So we have an inducement now to operators to bring that steel pipe and those supplies to that company. The enterprise zone offers individuals that bring companies to the port, do business, certain tax incentives. We also have that redevelopment area that we're speaking of. One of the important things is in our port, we are what's called an operator's port. We are not a landlord port. Primarily, most of the ports on the West Coast actually lease out their terminals to terminal operators. At the Port of Stockton, we operate our terminals. We welcome all vessel operators. And this is basically a good business model to follow because it brings business to the port and helps us develop the businesses that you're going to see in a couple of moments. Now, the CEQA, being here in California, if you want to attract a business to your area, you're going to have to go through that process. Well, with us in the port, one of the things that when we received that naval base, there were over 3,000 Stocktonians working there. They lost their positions. Part of the deal with the Navy when we got that was to develop the area, bring jobs back to the area. That's a non-traditional port job. Ports, basically, it was cargo, and then, again, back and forth across the dock. But in the same regard, we didn't want to compete with our local developers and people that had businesses outside the port boundaries. So basically, what we get involved in is bringing in maritime industry, people who have a need to use the waterway. And one of the things when you do bring yourself on board, in our properties department, we have an environmental group, and they actually walk you through the process to get your SIGWA documentation. And in a couple slides forward, I'm going to show you just how successful we have been with this process. One of the major keys to the success at the Port of Stockton is the simple word called diversity. We do a number of different projects. I came on board to the port 10 years ago, and basically as marketing, we used to market ourselves as anything that did not go in a box. Well, that changed a year ago. Coming next month, we are going to be in the box business, and I'll explain that to you in a little bit. But we had to do a little bit of tweaking of our marketing system. The products, when we talk about diversity, steel products are big on our port. Dry bulk fertilizers. We just had company Yara open up a $25 million investment in the port, bringing in fertilizers. 85% of the fertilizers that are used in the agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley come through the Port of Stockton. Those are coming in on vessels, most of them from Scandinavia. Liquid fertilizers. These are also vessel operators that are bringing in tankers into the port. They're bringing in liquid fertilizers. We also even have molasses coming in from Central America. Bulk sulfur is one of our exports. We've gone to the refineries. What used to be a byproduct and used to be a throwaway discarded item was molten sulfur, part of the gasoline refining. They take that now over to Stockton and they change it into this prill. It's a heavy yellow sand. The reason they do that is because when they load it on the ship and they send it out, it actually works as a fertilizer. Goes to India. In India, it's taken off the ship, changed to a liquid form, and it's used as a pH control in their agricultural farms. Bulk cement. We have over $100 million, 3 various companies that have set up facilities at the port. Package cargoes. A number of these things run from exotic woods, rice export, which is one of our big exports out of the port. We also have things which is kind of sound bags of sand. Well, bags of sand, it turns out this is a fine silica sand that actually goes into the bottling plants. We have bottling plants locally in Stockton that make the bottles for the wineries of Napa Valley and Sonoma. We have large wine groups that are involved in that. So this is why we actually have sand coming into the port. Project cargoes, again, vessel operators, ro-ro people. We've had heavy equipment leave the port. We've had everything from yachts. One of the newest endeavors is we're heavily involved in wind energy, alternative energy sources. What you're looking at the bottom left-hand corner, just to give you an idea of the size of the port itself, when we took over that naval base, that is a train of windmill towers. These towers are in excess of 80 feet. What you're looking is a mile-long train that is actually leaving the docks in Stockton. We have a 1.25 mile dock on the West Complex with double rail on it. That's 2.5 miles of on-dock rail. What that means to a vessel operator is when they bring those towers in, instead of having to discharge them, put them on a truck, carry them to a laydown area, put them in a laydown area, have another truck come in, put them on that truck and leave the port, they can take those towers and discharge them from the vessel directly to a rail car. Once that train is put together, that train leaves the port. And we're fortunate in the Port of Stockton in that we're serviced by both Class I major railroads. We have both the Union Pacific and we have the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. But we also have one additional marketing point that we like to point out. It's an unusual circumstance on the West Coast. The two are co-joint owners of the California Central Traction Company. This is a third-party switching energy that moves the cars and the rail cars within the port. Most ports, you'll have a third-party operator. You'll get another charge. What this means to a business person is that when they negotiate a rail rate with either of the majors, that California traction rate is incorporated in their contract. So this is an inducement to get these companies to come to the port. And of course, when they come to the port, that means vessel operators now have cargo going out, or they're bringing in the cargo in that's going to go out on those rail cars. One of the biggest and newest minerals that we've had now through the port, and we do a lot of minerals past future. We're celebrating our 80th anniversary. Actually, the port's been in business since 1848 in the gold rush days. But we had a unique thing happen to us in 2012. We started shipping out iron ore to China. Primarily for about the first 79 years, Port of Stockton was known as an import port. Most of our commodities, most of the items that came into the port came from foreign markets to the U.S. For the first time last year, our port actually had exports that exceeded the tonnage. So we became an export port. We're one of the first few on the country right now that has actually arrived at that status. And iron ore has been pretty good to us on that. It's added about 1.2 million metric tons to last year's totals, and we expect to do even more. Now, one of the other unique things, when I talk about diversity, we've talked about bulk ships, liquid ships, ro-ro vessels. And I mentioned that the port now is going to get involved in containers. Well, the United States government, when they started their projects, they used to call them the shovel-ready projects. They had a round of funding that came on board called the Tiger I funding. Now they're up to Tiger IV. But in that initial stage, they had money approved for those entities that could show that they had a project that could get started today and make use of the current resources that were available and serve the community that was in that area. The port joined in a partnership with the U.S. Maritime Administration, the Valley Air Control, and Water Control, along with the Port of Oakland, Stockton, Sacramento, and we submitted an application to get funding for an all-water corridor servicing Sacramento, Stockton, and the Port of Oakland. We were successful in that Tiger I funding, and a large sum of money, $33 million, was obtained to start this M580 corridor. Now, what the M580 corridor does, it simply is a tool. It offers an alternative to cargo people, cargo shippers, and importers to be able to bring their boxes to the Port of Stockton, where they are then placed on a barge, and then it proceeds down to the Port of Oakland, where it's loaded on a vessel and then goes to its market. Those people that wish to can schedule through their steamship lines and such to have boxes brought into Oakland, put on a barge, and discharged in Stockton. Why this becomes interesting to people is that right nowadays, those of you that have ever taken a ride on either I-80 down to Oakland or have traveled from Stockton to the Port of Oakland, especially the truck traffic, many of those truck drivers, it's a full-day trip. They get one turn. It takes them that long. Basically, it's about a 2.5-hour drive if they're lucky. Then they have to wait at the gates to get admitted into the port. Then they have to discharge their cargo, and then they have to take a box back. With this service, what we're hoping to use is that the local truckers will be able to come in. They'll be able to bring a single box to the Port of Stockton to be loaded on that barge, go back to their customer, and bring a second box, a third box. In other words, they're going to be making not one trip a day. They can do 2, 3, 4 turns and bring that shipper's items to the port, load them on the barges, and then bring them down to the vessel operator, who are these container ships. And as you saw an example, you've got container ships, they're just growing bigger and bigger. And it's going to be few ports that are able to handle those type of ships. We were fortunate in partnering with Oakland and that the service itself is not just going to be the Port of Stockton operating this. We have partners. One of the partners in the initial phase of the startup is a group called Ports America. Ports America operates the Outer Harbor Terminal in Oakland. They are also a presence at the Port of Stockton. So what you'll have is that when a shipper has a box going out, he'll be bringing his box on a truck line that he knows, bringing it into a gate. Ports America people will be storing the box in a laydown area that they have, and they'll be responsible for loading the barge. And at the other end, when it arrives in Oakland, they'll be taking that off in their terminal and loading it onto one of these steamship lines. The reason I put the steamship lines up there was just simply so that people could have an idea of the people that are involved in this. Now, one last thing, as I said, an inducement. Why does a vessel operator want to come here? One of the things that we've been very successful in through our properties department and through our business policies, what you're looking at are approved projects. The value of those projects, nearly $2 billion. This is within the last 8 years. These projects are currently up and operating on the port. These aren't conceptual projects. They're not on a drawing board. They're not going through engineering. These fellows are up and running. Ferguson, the pipe group that I spoke about, is down in the lower corner. They did so well at the Foreign Trade Zone, they opened up a distribution center, 650,000 square feet, employing over 150 Stocktonians. DTE is an energy company, Pacific Ethanol. Wilmar Gavilon is, again, another new project that's coming in, food-grade oils that we'll be having at the port. We'll be having new tankers coming into the port. Proposed projects, these are drawing board projects. These are in various stages right now that are going on in the port that are in either going through CEQA documentation or engineering and such. But as you can see, you're talking about another $1.5 billion, another additional almost 1,000 jobs. So we've been very successful in bringing businesses here and employment to the area. Basically, currently, if we go back today, we've got about 1,600 jobs related into port, 900 direct, 2,000 induced, total of over 4,500. We already exceeded that 3,000 limit that the Navy had put on us. One of the other inducements that we've had that's made the port successful is the use of being able to obtain grants, both from the federal government and from the state of California. One of the ways that we've used these grant monies, one of them in securing, basically for port security. We have a computerized system that'll be coming on board using infrared cameras, GPS locations and such to aid the pilots in moving vessels up and down the river. This project should be completed sometime this summer, and we've got a number of media people that are going to be using us as a case study. The Port of Stockton is going to be one of the most technologically advanced ports in the country, and that includes your large container ports. So you'll be reading about us, as I said, in the coming years. You can get an idea of what we had. We had federal funding for these projects and state funding, another 308 jobs created. Department of Transportation, U.S. government, again, number of jobs created, number of grant money that we were able to secure for ourselves. We've been quite successful in that. And this is one of the things that makes the port so notable now in a number of areas throughout the world. I'd like to thank you for the time. I just got a message that we're about ready and through, but for those of you that would like to learn a little bit more about the port, please stop by our website, portofstockton.com. Anything and everything you want to know. We also have all of our staff on there. You can send us an email. Thank you.
Okay, we've committed to wrapping this thing up right about now, but if there are any questions from anyone or for any of our panelists, we do have a couple of roving microphones. So if there are, we have a question over here.
Hang on one second.
Mr. Zaninelli, is there a possible way of getting copies of your slides, either off a website or hard copy?
Yeah.
Well, they'll be on our,
Yeah.
oh, very good.
It's released to be shown, yes.
Okay, any other questions? Go ahead.
Brian Hooker with Congressman John Garamandi's office. Dr. Gundersen, I found your slideshow fascinating, and your research is very interesting. I'll stand up, sorry. I was wondering, in your research with your research team, are you collaborating? You showed a slide of the Sandia National Lab in Los Alamos. Are you working with Sandia National Lab out here in their combustion research?
The short answer is no, but we are interacting with them in May. We were just there about 2 months ago. They have a great team. It's really a wonderful facility, and we're hoping to do some work with Marcus Schoberg there.
My question is for Dr. Gundersen. I'm Dan Reese with Intellex. Dr. Gundersen, in your presentation, you did not directly address carbon dioxide, but you seem to imply that pulsed ignition would break down the carbon dioxide molecule. Is that a correct conclusion from your statement? And if so, when the molecule is broken down, how do the individual components react such that they don't recombine?
Well, they do, and our goal is to produce a more complete combustion and reduce carbon dioxide that way. So the initial events occur in a very short time, under 100 nanoseconds, and one of the there's a complex physics underlying this stuff, and one of the complex physics issues is if you have something that occurs in such a short time, how does it affect a combustion event, which occurs milliseconds later, 10,000 times later, and so we're trying to work out some of that chemistry. And the short answer is that we're trying for a more complete combustion that reduces the production of CO2 during the combustion event itself, and so the initial impact on CO2 is kind of hard. There's a significant role of water and water vapor and oxygen in the process that persists over this time.
Okay, I have a follow-on question. The experience of using LNG in diesel engines and trucks has demonstrated that the higher combustion temperature of LNG erodes the cylinders. Are you experiencing higher combustion temperatures in your marine diesel experiments?
Oh, good question. And I don't know the answer to that at this point.
Any other questions?
I will make just an offhand comment about that. One of the interesting things is there's an area of great interest that's sort of over the horizon called flameless combustion. So we're all examples of flameless combustion because we burn about 100 watts on average, and we do it at low temperatures. So, and one of the intriguing things with this transient plasma that we're using is, can you induce a chemistry that occurs at a lower temperature? And so that really is an area of interest that I'd like to explore, but I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay.
Tim Schott on behalf of the California Association of Port Authorities. For us lay people, can you give us a sense of what it costs to build this most recent generation of large container vessels and how financing is arranged for those kind of things?
It's kind of an ebb and flow thing. The original 13,000 TU vessels, not just ours, but everybody's, were they were gigantic numbers, 125 to 150 million. That is, as the yards get slower because of the economy situation, that all sorts of deals start to crop up. All of a sudden, you can get one built probably for 110 if you can get a leasing situation. There's another complexity with leasing and financing, that getting financing is extremely difficult, just like we talked about. Some of the companies are having significant problems with getting the credit needed, and a number of ships have been pushed off or canceled, partly because the market's been soft, partly because they couldn't get the financing. But I would say now you could probably get a deal on a 13,000 in the 110 range, according to what I've read. And that will go up and down depending on how the yards get busy or don't get busy. It also has an effect on break bulk. Break bulk is over tonnage tremendously. So they've cut down the number of break bulk ships being built, and that has an effect on the yards that they discount everything. So.
All right, well, we're going to conclude this panel, take a 15-minute break, and then come back for a presentation on maritime transportation systems, safety and security, lessons learned. Thank you very much.